Hey Emma,
Yes, Mal.
what do you call the second chart you made explaining a proof?
I don't know, honestly.
Graphologic 2. Hello, and welcome to Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
Look, it wasn't the best. I say this every week. It wasn't the
Listen,
best.
it's just that you tutor, okay? And I have not done math for 4 years.
Logic mostly enters my life through Clickbait Boyfriend, by which I mean he took one class and it was horrible. So
Do you do graphs in philosophy?
I don't know that graphs are really a thing that you do in logic. I just needed something to be graph so it could rhyme with path.
Uh-huh.
I suppose I probably could have done something about the path of logic. That only really just occurred to me. But it's too late now because we're rolling. And I only do retakes of jokes when I realize I forgot an important part of the joke.
What do you mean? You do it perfectly every time.
Yes, you're right. I never have to say, hold on, before we start recording, let me come up with a joke. That doesn't ever happen.
No, because you always are super prepared and think of your joke a couple days ahead of time.
Exactly. I go through many drafts, many iterations.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure
She really focuses in on the word choice and the flow.
Make sure it's really funny. Well, thanks for tuning in. I'm your very prepared host, Madelyn.
I'm your logic-free host, Emma.
No logic here.
None.
And we'll be talking about 2 games, one of which is Pathologic 2, hence the joke, and the other is EVE Online. So we've got a lot to cover, as you can maybe imagine if you're familiar with these games at all this week. So let's jump in our spaceships and take off, shall we?
We shall. So, from all the reading, and I did a considerable amount of reading about EVE Online.
Me too.
I don't think I even really know how to play. Still.
Yes. So, let's just disclaimer here. Neither Emma nor I have ever played EVE Online, and we are very aware of the fact that it is a very, very, very complex game. So
yes.
Please forgive us if the things that we say about the gameplay are not quite correct or are sort of correct but aren't getting at the nuances. We're really doing our best here, but this is a game that feels like it will take years to truly master.
Yeah. Like, we do our best most of the time to give a look to the games that we talk about, whether that's watching or playing, but EVE is really not something I feel like you can just, jump into.
Yeah, it's not like you can play a couple hours of EVE and, you have an idea of what it's like.
Yeah.
And that's something I'd like to talk about, because this is a type of game I feel like I have zero experience in, which is not, that might have been the case, sort of, for some types of games when we started this podcast 2.5 years ago, but is not frequently the case anymore. We're talking about a game that I've never even played a game that was sort of like that game. But EVE and these kind of MMORPGs, and not even just MMORPGs in general, but these ones that are incredibly player-driven and involve super complicated player-created in-game economies. I cannot say that I have ever played anything that really feels like this seems like it must feel.
Yeah. Honestly, reading about it, and we can return to this sort of theme, I guess, in Pathologic as well. But it really feels like a very, a virtual, really long-term kind of LARP experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was trying to feel like, is this a game that I would ever be interested in playing? And I was saying to myself, I have enjoyed the Dungeons and Dragons that I've played, right? And in that sense of creating a world with a bunch of people that doesn't really exist, I sort of get the appeal. But also, wow, it just feels like if you're really going to be good at this game, it feels like you really have to devote it has to really be your hobby. And like more than that, it has to really be like your second job.
Your second life, you might say.
Yeah, literally. And I don't know why I feel the same way about speedrunning, and it's an impression in myself that I try to actively combat as someone who thinks that video games are worthwhile. But when I think about somebody having this game as a hobby, or as somebody having speedrunning as a hobby, I do have to check myself from thinking, oh my God, how do they have time for that? Or like, why would you choose to spend your time that way?
Yeah.
When, any number of hobbies are just about as equally, I don't mean equally dumb as in it's dumb. I just mean any number of hobbies are equally like, whatever, who cares?
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with doing this.
It's just where you choose to devote your time, right? Like you said, like if you play EVE Online is what you do after your job. And that's where, your relationships are and stuff like that.
I just struggle with getting past the sort of cultural expectation that these games are for losers.
Well, I honestly, like, it's fascinating to read about. Like, having read about it, I don't think these people are losers. Like,
oh, no, not at all.
No, I'm just saying, like, yes, I understand that initial cultural impression, right? Like, that's the gamer stereotype and whatever. There are some gamers with a capital G out there, right? That do fall within that stereotype. But, like, just, like, reading about, like, the stuff that these people have done over, like, how old is it now?
It was released in 2003, so it's coming up on 20 years. It's like 17 years.
Yeah. 17 years, and some people have been playing, right? And, like, leading, basically, countries, right? Like, just on their computer. Just, like, space countries. It's pretty much unfathomable to me.
It feels like something, and in a minute, listeners, we will tell you what EVE, like, give you an overview of what EVE Online is to the best of our ability if you're not familiar with it. Sorry about that. We have a lot, it's interesting to talk about. It feels like the kind of thing that you'd want to put on your resume.
Yeah.
But you probably never could for most jobs, but, like, it should be impressive that, like, hey, I've spent a decade leading a virtual corporation worth billions of in-game currency.
Yeah, depending on the job, and especially with more modern times, you could probably start putting that on your resume.
Yeah. But it feels like something that should be like a top-line resume thing that should bear weight, as opposed to something that you have to feel kind of worried about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, it would never be weird to say, yeah, I have this side hustle that I do where I own a business and it's really successful. But it is weird to say, yeah, I subscribe to a game where I run a fake corporation super well.
Yeah.
Or I'm a head diplomat, or whatever, I run a bank.
Yeah.
Anyway, to give a brief overview of EVE Online for those who have not heard about it, and I recommend reading about it. I saw a comment that really struck me on one of the articles that was like, EVE Online feels like a game, like one of the rare games that's more fun to read about than it is to play. Which I was like, I felt that. I was like, as someone who probably would never want to devote my time to this specifically, or this kind of game specifically, I still find the articles really, really interesting, even though I probably only really understand about a third of them. Mm-hmm. But EVE Online, basically, it's a space Morpig. I always want to pronounce it as something, and it never quite comes out right. Developed by the Icelandic CCP Games. And basically, you play as a space colonist. There's this whole lore of it's set like 20,000 years in the future, and you're these humans colonizing that went through this wormhole that closed. So you got cut off from the Milky Way. And so now you live in New Eden, which is this new galaxy with these major, like there's all these different major societies and different races within those societies. And basically you can play pretty much however you want. Like you can just explore. You can become part of this massive, you have to pretty much become part of this massive in-game economy You can trade, but instead of having like guilds or something like that, which is sort of what you would think of traditionally in these kinds of games, generally you form corporations. How capitalist is that? But and so you work with your corporation to be the very best.
Yeah, I was actually, one of the ones I was reading about was from like close to the beginning of EVE. And there was like a big communist corporation.
Oof.
Where like you have to, when you enlist as like a soldier or become part of this group, you give all your stuff to like the great leader, basically.
That's freaking sick.
I know.
But also,
I mean, we wouldn't be saying this in like real life, but also like,
that's sick though that somebody was like, I'm gonna do this in this game and it's gonna work.
And there's like all this stuff of like, you know, trying to balance like having fun with like actually having like real, having to deal with other people in like political and economic ways. So like there's a lot of instances of like alliances that happen and then just like doesn't work because like they just aren't having fun with it. But like at the beginning there was like this alliance that for a while would have like 5-hour weekly meetings with the leaders to like work things out, like geographically and politically and bureaucratically and all that sort of things. And apparently it just wasn't sustainable from the fact that they're people with lives.
Yeah.
Right? So they can play the game a lot, but they can't sit in a 5-hour meeting.
Yeah.
Which is just like, I can't picture like even going into something and being like, we're having a 5-hour meeting. I guess it's not unlike Dungeons and Dragons type things, right?
Yeah,
like,
but Dungeons and Dragons is not a 5-hour meeting. Right? Dungeons and Dragons is 5 hours of playing the game. You know, I could imagine, I don't know that I really ever play video games for 5 hours at a stretch, just because like I have to eat generally.
Yeah.
And I just, you know, I need to take a break somewhere in there. But I could imagine sitting down and playing, like being like, yeah, I'm going to play this game for 5 hours. I cannot imagine. I have only ever been in 5-hour meetings, and they weren't even 5-hour meetings, like if it was like a retreat.
Yeah.
Right? And even though meetings within the retreat were not 5 hours long, like you got snack breaks. That's crazy.
But basically all the things I read were like book excerpts, because there is a history book of EVE Online. And at the time of the article's writing, they were also kickstarting a second book to continue the history. And it's just all like it's this very personal history of like people like this society that I was just talking about, like their leader named Sir Mole, like just really wanted to have a war, right? So he set about basically manufacturing a war with something called the Venal Alliance. So like fighters from his thing started doing like random incidental attacks, and the Venal Alliance came to him and was like, what's going on? And he was like, I don't know, it must be just some new recruits, they don't know our strict code, and I'm going to talk to him about it. And then he would take these chat logs and post them on their forum, and be, specifically the article said, a forum thread titled, "Who? Me? What? Why? Nah." It's just so funny to me.
It gets at something that is really at the core of this game, which is scamming.
Yeah.
So they have this really elaborate in-game economy. Like it has, things operate like a stock market, and there's supply and demand and all that stuff. And notably, it's not really very much tied to real currency, which I think is cool and reflective of like a different era of online gaming, right? Like you can buy certain items with real currency and theoretically sell those for in-game currency, but you can't just directly buy in-game currency. And obviously, and I'll talk about one incident with this specifically, but if you on the black market trade your in-game currency for real currency, like you're going to get banned. So I thought that was kind of neat. But yeah, there's just like a lot of your decision making in the game has to come down to, do you trust that the person is going to do with your money what they say you're going to do? And there are a couple of really big scandals where people basically ran a really elaborate con, including one guy who ran an e-bank. His name is Rick Dick. he stole billions of dollars of in-game currency just by like shutting down the bank. And then and the developers were like, that's fine, like if he wants to do that, that's part of the game, right?
Yeah.
But then he sold it to a third party for real money to pay for his son's medical bills, apparently, which is very sad.
Yeah.
But that's what they banned him for. They said, it's fine if he wants to scam you all out of like billions of fake dollars, but he can't trade those for a few $1,000s.
Yeah.
But it does get at like so much of what you're doing. It's not just a really complicated economy. It's also these very political games of trust.
But you know what, though? If he was doing it to pay his son's medical bills, like, props to that guy.
I know. Like, seriously.
Turning his hobby into a real side hustle.
Well done. They literally...
Like, he got banned, but, he got his money.
Yeah. They literally... I don't know if they still do. It seems like he maybe left a few years ago, but they had, for like a decade, they had a real economist on staff to help run the in-game economy.
Yeah.
Which, like, what a job.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if this, like, happens often, and I was only paying attention to it because we had the show coming up. But there's been some kind of major developments in EVE Online in the past couple weeks.
Yeah, I was reading about those, too.
So, apparently, at the end of June, there was a gigantic... So, there are these NPCs called drifters, which usually most of the time it seems like are pretty harmless. Like, they guard treasures, they can be dangerous, but they're not a huge threat. And at the end of June, they just went like totally rogue and started attacking a ton of player stuff and players. There's this huge alien invasion that's still going on that people at first thought was a glitch, but it seemingly was not. Or if it is, they've decided it's not a glitch, but I'm sure it wasn't. And now, just like last week, I think went into effect just a couple days ago, actually. They announced that, so like there's these like security levels in the game between -1 and 1. And at the top end, it's like high sec, where there are these NPC law enforcements where if you attack another player, they're going to kill you, basically. And then in the other end, the negative side, is null sec. There's no security. So in null sec space, like that's where all the battles happen, right? It's like the frontier. And then there's also something called wormhole space or unknown space. Doing my best here, people. Haven't played the game. But in unknown space, you used to have like this different kind of chat. Whereas in null sec and high sec, you knew who was there with you at all times. But in wormhole space, you didn't. You just knew if somebody sent a chat message, you'd see who they were. But now, theoretically in-game, because of the alien invasion, because they have to preserve whatever such and such resource to run the chat in the high-sec areas, right? So, null-sec is having communication that's like wormhole space. So you don't know who's with you anymore, which is just a huge shake-up for the game, basically.
Yeah. No, the article I was reading, like, I mean, and I would be pissed too, but I feel like that's part of the game experience. But they're just like, these aliens are coming and like we've built this stuff in the nullsec space for like 15 years. And it seems like it just wants to destroy all of it and see how that goes. And it feels like with that happening, that's something like that adds more confusion to actually trying to defend your space, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it was like, but just like when this started happening too, like the article I was reading in PC Gamer, like was talking with somebody who like went through what he thought at the beginning, and he thought it was sabotage at the start. And so he went through his gunner access lists for an hour to find a spy that didn't exist.
Yikes.
Which is just like so weird, right? Like you have access lists in this game that you can check.
Yeah.
And see if there's a spy going in and out. It's just, yeah. But then over like hours and hours more, even more start bases started getting hit by the drifters, and he started figuring out that it was really just an attack happening. And it seems like it was purposeful, because when this article reached out to, what is it?
CCP.
CCP, they said like the drifters aren't responding to our hails or something, basically.
That's funny.
Let me see what it was. It said, yes, CCV Games, personally, and a spokesperson said they reached out to the drifters for comment, but they rejected our hailing frequencies.
That's funny.
And they also sent an image, which is like a map of all the alliances, and like then like a picture with like lots of red and just the word drifters all over it. That they had intercepted.
Whose job was that?
I don't know. I guess it like I've always thought, in like reading about it, you think of EVE Online is really just like the developers are just there to make sure nothing breaks. But it's interesting to see them, and I guess it is an expansion, right? So there must be like events that happen.
Yeah, so they do pretty frequent. Well, they used to be on like a twice a year big expansion schedule, right? And now they are doing sort of a hybrid of the rapid expansion and big expansion stuff. Mm-hmm. So there is new stuff that comes to the game like semi-frequently, I guess, but not usually aggressively big changes like this. Mm-hmm. I did read some stuff about how they're sort of trying to update the like underlying game mechanics, which is neat. But I wonder if trying to clear out some of the stuff is part of the plan for making that possible. Yeah. If like cutting off chat in nullsec is going to allow them to like update the game. It would be a clever way to do that, a clever way to, make the game seem fresh and new. But also, man, if I had been building something for 15 years, I'd probably be pissed.
Yeah. That's how I feel about it too.
Yeah. It's relatively affordable, EVE Online. I looked into it, not because I was going to buy it, but because I was curious. It does have a free-to-play mode that lets you play like the vast majority of the game these days, but that's only been the case for the past 3 years. But it's like $10 to $15 a month, depending on how long the subscription you get, which, if you're doing this instead of going to the gym, you're saving some money.
Yeah.
I did read, obviously this is not up to date at all. I'm curious with the demographics, because in 2006, which granted was only 3 years after they released it, the average player was 27 and 95% were men, which I think is interesting.
I think that's partially a product of it being so old, right? Like, it's not the case nowadays, but I do believe in the olden days of gaming, there was a large majority of men playing games. And then once it's gone on so long, it becomes that, like, for us, for instance, like, the ease of entry becomes really intimidating, right? Mm-hmm. So I doubt you get... I wonder how many new players they get on a, normal basis versus how many have been retained from, like, 10 years or more.
Well, they had over 500,000 subscribers like 10 years ago. So I'm sure they're doing just fine.
I'm not saying they're not doing fine. I just wonder how many are new players and how many are just like things that they've managed to retain for that long.
Yeah.
It
does feel like it's a big couple weeks for MMORPGs.
Yep.
So if you're picking a time to get into them, honestly, this is probably a good time to get into EVE Online because everyone's going to be destroyed by aliens. So
there's no better time to get started than an alien invasion.
Just saying, level playing field. Take a break from Final Fantasy XIV.
Yeah.
So anything else you want to share about this game, for which I'm sure we could talk for, like, people could talk for hours and hours and hours, days?
Yeah, I just think, I think it's really impressive that there's been, there's nothing quite like this, I don't think.
I was trying to think, there's some other game, I can't remember what the title is, that's, notoriously difficult and online, and I can't remember what it is. But I don't think...
I've heard of EVE Online before, right?
Yeah.
I've always had it sort of in the back of my head, but I cannot think of anything that is as completely and honestly sandbox as EVE is, right? A lot of things call themselves sandbox games, but that's just within the scope of, certain mechanics, right? Yeah, you can get on your pirate ship and do whatever you want on your pirate ship and Sea of Thieves, but you can't, start a government, really. There's just not, facilities for that. There's not ways to handle that. But, EVE, you can just do it. You can just do what you want. And I think that's just crazy, honestly.
And it all runs basically on one server.
That's even more insane.
China has its own server, apparently, but that was mostly because when they started, like, it didn't launch in China initially, and they were worried about what was going to happen if they just, like, put a flood of new people into the existing server. Yeah. But yeah, there's, like, one server for everywhere but China, a China server, and then there are two that are mostly, like, test servers.
Wow.
Which is insane. How do you even run that?
I don't know.
I don't know how computers work, but
I don't know either, Mal.
But that seems like it should take a big computer. Seems like maybe Iceland is sitting on a computer that is running EVE Online.
Maybe it is.
That's our conspiracy theory of the week.
Speaking of conspiracies...
Oh, that was pretty good. I did set that up. I didn't even mean to.
I don't even really know if, like, it's conspiracies in Pathologic, too, or if it's just weirdness.
Is it that everyone's brain is rotting, or are they trying to frame you?
I don't know. But yes, our new game, I don't know if we did this at the beginning, actually, with old game and new game, but whatever. They should have guessed from the joke.
I said it was Pathologic 2. I didn't define it as the new game, but hopefully people guessed.
Yes. So Pathologic 2 is, in fact, not a sequel to Pathologic, but rather a reimagining of the original game. So it was originally planned like as a remake. It's made by Ice Pick Lodge, which is a Russian studio. But then they started shifting it and decided that they wanted to do more than just remake the original game. The original Pathologic, by the way, came out in 2003 and was very weird and unfortunately also pretty buggy. So I feel like when it came out, a lot of people didn't really quite get into the weirdness of it just because it was so, like, it was difficult and also, like, glitchy in some ways that made the difficulty even worse.
And also I think there was just a little bit less tolerance for that. In, you know, we expect our games to be a little weirder now.
Yeah, fair enough. So what's out right now of Pathologic 2 is actually technically one of 3 planned parts, which is planned to be like one with each of 3 main characters. So this one follows a man named Haruspex, who has returned to his hometown, basically, called Town on Gorkon. Also, his name's not actually Haruspex. He's just known as that. Huh? Yeah, his name's Artemy. He's just known as Haruspex, I suppose. But he comes back to town after he received a letter from his father, and returns basically to find that his father has died. And that there's some weird stuff going on in the town.
And they think he killed his father. Right?
I don't know.
You've played the game.
I have not gone past the first hour yet. I'll be honest. I was planning to play more, and then I just played a lot of Judgment. Okay? I'm sorry.
Wow. No
but
judgment
I've only
here.
played the first hour, which doesn't even really get into the meat of what the game is. It's just like a very trippy series of like hallucinations that this guy is having, like on the train back to town, and then he comes back and people are trying to kill him. Yeah. And that's about where I stopped.
I was expecting you to regale us with stories of your failure.
I'm sorry, I have not gotten a chance to fail yet.
Instead, you've completely failed me.
Yeah, mostly what I can say so far is it's real damn weird. And interesting, I guess.
So, basically, to talk a little bit more about how the game will progress once Emma plays the rest of it, is it's this 12-day cycle, where I think the people in this town, I mean, there's plague in this town, right? The original Pathologic was a plague simulator. What a genre title. And you're a doctor, right? So you're trying to keep people alive. But the game pretty much encourages you to, not encourages, but forces you to fail over and over and over again. Just because people in the town do not trust you, they're out to get you, even though you are trying to keep them alive. But you can't really die. Every time you die, you just wake up and time has passed and things have gotten weirder and you have fewer things, so it just makes it harder. This is why I have not gotten this game. I realized in the last 2 episodes, I was like, maybe I'll get it. And I just, folks, if you haven't been able to tell from the slightly degraded quality of my audio this week, I'm in San Diego on vacation, and I just couldn't bring myself to play a plague simulator in sunny San Diego that was going to make me feel bad about myself over and over and over again.
Yeah. You very much have to be paying attention to your own body in Pathologic 2. You have to feed yourself and drink and make sure you're getting enough sleep and make sure you're not wandering too much in plague-infested areas. But Ice Pick Lodge did, after a couple weeks of it being out, add some difficulty sliders. I went and looked at them. I haven't touched them yet, but I went and looked at them and, clicked on the, just to see, because it automatically has all the sliders, off. You have to actually click on that you want difficulty adjustment, and it gives you, a warning. It's challenges are part of Pathologic 2, but, we want you to play it. So, if you really have to, here you go, but please don't. Is basically the gist of the message that popped up.
That's interesting. I don't know how I have such difficulty, with how I feel about difficulty.
Yeah, we've talked about this before, I think, so we won't get too far in it. My general thought on it is that difficulty is very subjective. And the fact that if you want a player to feel challenged the right amount, sometimes just having one constant difficulty isn't going to do that, right? It's not going to. And so something that might be really hard for me might be just impossible for somebody else. And that if you can turn something down, that just makes it really difficult for that person, then we're getting equivalent experiences, even though technically that version of the game's easier.
I will say, though, that in a game like Pathologic 2, where failure is built in, it feels a little bit less essential than in games where failure is not such an integral part of the gameplay.
Yeah. I think I'm only going to touch it if I am just failing in the exact same way or at an exact same part over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. Right? As long as there's some sort of forward progression in my failure, that feels like it's going to be fine for me.
Yeah.
It's when it's just, something that I cannot figure out or cannot deal with at that moment. Right.
And I feel like
I feel like you should touch it.
I feel like that's generally a good rule of thumb as to when to mess with difficulty in a game. Unless, for some other reason, you're only interested in the story or you're deliberately not particularly interested in something else. I think that's generally a good rule of thumb, but I just think in this game in particular, part of the joy, I guess,
the joy
is that you're going to be bad at it. And I don't think it's that long of a game. It takes place over the course of 12 in-game days. So I cannot, and it's, only supposed to be one chapter of the game. So I'm not sure how long it is, but I cannot imagine it being more than 12 hours.
Probably depends on how many times you fail.
Sure, that's fair. Yeah, but the time continues to progress when you fail. So honestly, probably if you fail more, it'll even be shorter. Which is not usually how it works. But yeah, I think in this game where failure is something that you're really supposed to experience, it should probably, I feel less weird about their little pop-up, where normally I would think, oh, that's kind of shamey and weird. Let people make their own decisions. In this game, if you're not failing, you're not really getting the experience they wanted you to get. Or seemingly.
Yeah.
It also, I read not before we picked this, I read when the game was coming out and everyone on Twitter was talking about it. An article from Kotaku about how deep is too deep to restart. Where he was like, I'm 3 hours in and I feel like I've really failed in ways that were dumb. But now it's too late. If it was 1 hour, that's no time. If it was 2 hours, that's just the length of a movie. But 3 hours, 3 hours is too much. And I identified.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like, if you mess up, are you going to restart, or are you just going to roll with it?
Me?
Yeah. This gets into it's nice, like in Fire Emblem, right? In certain games, it's, like, almost part of the culture to restart if you mess up.
Yeah.
But, like, what about in a game like Pathologic?
Well, I feel like I'm gonna have to actually start playing it before I can make that decision.
Fair enough.
Right? Like, honestly, like, even having read about it, I don't really have a conception of what failure looks like in this game. Or how it feels. Or, like, are there multiple endings to this?
I think so, yeah. It seems that way.
Okay, so then it's not a 12-hour game, basically. Because you have to do it multiple times if you want to see all of it.
Sure.
But, yeah. I don't know.
Fair
I'm
enough.
just gonna have to see how it goes. And if I feel like, I don't know, like I don't know. What does it mean to have failed? Do I still get to an end of the game?
Yes.
Or
that's
am I
what
just...
it seems like, yeah.
Or am I, like, or, you know. If I'm 3 hours in and it feels like... I do see the issue if you're, like, 3 hours in and you feel like you have 9 hours left before you get to an ending and you already know that it's over. Right? I do see that issue.
But I guess you don't really know, right? You know, maybe there'll be a way for you to turn it around.
Yeah.
It's tricky.
I don't know.
It's tricky judgment call. I also read an article, and can you confirm this? Are there, like, theatrical elements to it?
The first person you talk to is a director.
Okay.
It seems to be a very, like, he says, like, this is our second time around, or a second try. Which seems to be very much like the game's designer being like, it is. And like, I don't know, like my answer or something was like, how were you expecting us to succeed under those conditions? You're on a stage, and then after you finish your conversation with the director, everything goes black, and then everything comes up again, and you're in front of a doctor's table, basically. But it's very, like, there's a lot of, seems to be use of, like, spotlights, at least in this very, weird thing. I don't know, like, you're on a train, and then some guy, like, climbs out of a coffin, and you talk to him, and then the train crashes and you have like a vision, but then the train hasn't crashed and the guy's coffin is gone, but the guy is still there, and then you have like another vision. It's just, the first hour is really it's a very, very weird linear trip, I guess, where it tries to teach you the basic mechanics without the risk of you like failing.
Well, you'll have to, because I read an article that says that theatrical motif kind of continues and comes back. So you'll have to report back on a side quest, because that made me like really interested in buying the game. But then I thought, don't do this to yourself, Madelyn.
One thing that's interesting, when you talk to people, like a very close up of their face comes up, sort of like in a spotlight, basically. So it very much feels like they're kind of like monologuing at you.
Well,
I guess.
Watch out for any Chekhov's guns, I guess. Are in Russia.
That's true. It is in Russia.
Watch out for upper middle class people whining about their lives and sitting around doing nothing.
Yes, I will look out for that.
Just because, you know.
Right now, there's kids who wear dog masks and men who wear bird masks.
Yeah.
And some other people.
This sounds freaky.
It's like weird. Like they have like the kids with the dog masks, like they just have the dog on top of their head. The bird masks too, I guess. But then you could also like they'll have like holes in the mask so you can see like one of their eyes. Or the bird mask people, like you can see into the contraption that's holding the bird mask on their head. It's very costumey in that way, I guess. Also.
How many nightmares did the developers have cumulatively featuring those characters?
I don't know. They're pretty freaky. I guess the birds are like kind of like plague doctor masks, right?
Yeah.
So that at least like fits in the theme, and plague doctors are scary to begin with, I guess. But I don't know what's going on with the dog children yet.
Well, please keep me updated on the dog children as you learn more.
I did see on Twitter that the kids are a good place to start putting your trust near the beginning.
They sort of imply that on their website, even.
Pathologic tips and tricks to get started that I looked at.
Nice. Cheater, but nice. So
it wasn't like spoilers. It was just like, pay attention to this. And one of them was like, pay attention to the kids. So I'll learn more about the dog children, probably. I'm looking forward to it.
I like some good dog children to really...
I like dogs. I like kids.
Perfect.
Not sure how I like dog kids, but we'll see. Maybe I will. Maybe I'll love them. Maybe they'll be just the sweetest dog children.
So, I think that we've encountered a reverse Tetris problem this week.
In that there's too much going on.
So, long-term, very long-term listeners might recall that in our episode that featured Tetris as an old game, we found that games that have incredibly simple mechanics like Tetris, or, you know, as we talked about in our podcast version of our Pop Culture Association presentation, games that have high control, low power. Wait, where does Tetris fall? I'm all mixed up.
It's high power, low control, isn't it?
Yes, you're right, because there's not that much you can do, but it has a lot on the impact. You're absolutely right. In games that have a very, like, that overall, which is not how we really use our thing, but that's how I'm bastardizing it here. In games that are overall based on, like, a very small number of mechanics that are high power, low control, they're really hard to mash up, right? How do you mash up Tetris? There just aren't enough game mechanics to use that you can create a game that isn't just, like, themed Tetris. Mm-hmm. And maybe now that there's like Tetris 99 out there, we'd be able to do something interesting with that. But like games like Tetris have always posed a problem for us in mashups because there's just not enough to take from them to put into a new version of a game. EVE Online, I think, presents the converse in that it is a life game where you can do anything you want. And how do you mash that up in a way that remains true to that ethos?
MMO PS.
What is the PS? Plague Simulator. No.
No, I'm serious. Like, you get like the MMO and there's, you know, a big society, but it's like an MMO set in during the, what is it, the Black Death?
Yeah.
Yes, it's an MMO set during the Black Death.
That doesn't feel like it could be sustainable over a period of time, though, right? Eventually everyone
Hey,
would
the
die.
Black Death was sustainable over 100 years. Or so, right?
Fair enough. Fair enough.
No, but I don't know how it'd work, right? Like, because there'd have to be some, like, do you die in EVE?
You can die in EVE, yeah.
There's, like, you don't, like, respawn. You're just, like, dead and you have to start over.
I think there are ways to, like, clone yourself and stuff, but I believe so,
Of course
yeah.
there are. Okay. So there's, like, the threat of death, right? So you have to work together in order to deal with the Black Death. But also, of course, you want to have power after the Black Death is over, right?
Not that that'll ever happen, because it's a game, but yeah.
You want to be in sort of like a set. Well, maybe you could have like periods of respite.
Right, I was going to say there should probably be different like the expansions would roll out new plagues.
Yeah. Or like, you know, plague-like threats. right?
Sure.
It doesn't necessarily have to be illness of people,
Nanobots.
but it could be like pestilence, for instance, or something.
Yeah.
Hooligans.
Not hooligans.
Hooligans invading your towns.
Nice. Yeah, hooligans.
The
feels
equivalent of the alien invasion is medieval hooligans.
Well, I was going to say, in some ways, this alien invasion does feel in the spirit of this mashup, right?
Yeah.
It adds this element of people randomly attacking you and failure and killing you, right?
Yeah.
So, in this like way that's like kind of like most games don't encourage failure, right? So in this way that's kind of off-putting, especially in this thing that's like been developed over time, it's especially off-putting. So that'd be cop-out, and I really like your plague simulator idea, and I want to continue to develop it a little here. But I do just want to say that, hey, that's got some of the spirit of Pathologic to it as well.
Yeah, fair enough.
So yeah, I like this idea of having to band together and form like probably guilds, right? And like you have apothecaries who are researching new cures, and you have you have to have enforcers who are like doctor enforcers who are testing people, right? And if you get sick, you probably want to try to you either can decide like, do I want to try to get cured, or do I want to try to spread it to as many people in rival guilds as I can before I die?
Yeah.
This would be interesting if very, very dark.
Yeah. True enough, right?
It feels a little bit darker than space piracy for some reason.
But I do think, like, when, for instance, like, a new plague is developing, like, that'd be really interesting, I feel like, experience.
Yeah.
Right? Because you'd have to come up with symptoms and think about how this plague would begin to manifest on people.
Yeah.
As a developer. And then as, like, a player, you have to, like, would you notice it from the get-go? Or would you be noticing it only after, like, thousands of people were starting to suffer from it?
Right.
It's like Pandemic, but with, like, a human element to it.
Yeah. That'd be kind of cool. I think it would be too dark to ever really succeed, but it would be kind of cool. I don't know. People like Pandemic.
Yeah. I mean, you have to add some like fun stuff to it, I guess.
Romance
right?
simulator. Like, just kidding.
Like, I don't know if, like, to really truly be like EVE, you would have to, like, make, like, a full sort of medieval society. Like, modern medieval, right? Because we don't want just, like, we want this to be an inclusive place.
Sure.
That uses medieval aesthetics, but is perhaps more diverse.
Yeah, more diverse.
Actual medieval
Kinder
times.
to its oppressed genders.
Yes, exactly. So we'd have that. It wouldn't be, like, historically accurate. We're just using, like, the plague and the limited technology.
Slavery is not a mechanic in this game.
No slavery.
Nor is serfdom, really. Although I suppose maybe that's what your, like, low-level players are. Yeah.
I mean, there's some elements of, like, servitude to being just, like, a soldier in EVE, right? Because I imagine there are just soldiers to certain
There are probably
things.
still countries in this. Like, there could be normal military invasions. You just have to be super careful about your germs.
Yeah. So you have, like, multiple different things going on. And the plague is, like, a new wrinkle to just the general, like, forming a society and power struggles that you might have already.
Well, if EVE comes up with a space plague expansion, they better call us first.
Space plague. Plague from outer space. How is this not like a B horror movie already? It must be.
Probably
right?
is. No, they would call it a virus. Hey.
No, you know what? I think that sounds like a really fun idea for a game that I would never ever play.
You're right. It's combined two games that I would never play.
You can be a dog child if you want.
Well, there are plague dogs.
The plague dogs, children.
It's one of the guilds. They're dedicated to just spreading the plague.
Yeah.
You'd have like exterminators. People could be exterminators who like dealt with vermin that spread the plague.
Yeah.
It's a lot of interesting wrinkles that we could introduce in this game, combined from two games, which I find very interesting but not playable.
I'm very like in terms of like I feel like the reason, like, I really like this concept, but I feel like the reason that there's really just EVE is that we're no longer in a time where you can just start something like that demands so much of your player's life.
I
Right?
don't know, maybe. I mean,
there are so many games and so many games that want to be your life in different ways.
That's true.
That it would be so very hard to start something like this from the ground up without giving people a lot to begin with. And I feel like that already sort of takes out some of the appeal of EVE, right?
I don't know. It's hard to know. I don't know if there's a market for this of people that would be interested in this but are intimidated to start in something that has this much history, right? If there is a significant population that feels that way, then maybe starting one that's like EVE would really capture those people's imagination, right? I think there's a possibility of that.
Have to do some field research.
I think it's unlikely. But I also think it's unlikely because I'm fighting that kind of cultural feeling of like, who are these nerds?
For me, it's just like, oh man, like every game wants to be a game as a service now.
Well, that's right? True. Yeah.
They want to keep you playing as long as possible. And not in a similar way, not in an EVE sort of way, just in like we've got a new raid, we've got a new boss, whatever.
Well, that's why I sort of wonder, that's more my concern of starting this. It's more my concern of starting this today is people would be expecting content upgrades just like constantly, because that's what we've learned from these games as service, right? And so I wonder whether you could start something like EVE that's so much more player driven when we expect to be
like EVE, a lot of the content, like the content updates, is just people doing things.
Yeah.
Right? And that's just so different from our gaming ethos. And that's not like a good or bad thing necessarily. It just would make something like that hard to start in a lot of ways. That being said, I don't want to put a damper on like one of our few decent mashups, but
yeah. No, it's an incredibly cool mashup that someone probably should have started in 2007. But that's okay.
But see, if they had started in 2007, then we would have gotten like a super ugly, sexist, racist, historically accurate medieval portrayal. You're absolutely
right. That's true. So this is your chance, people. Someone jump on this idea. We don't really even want that much money from it. We just want it to be called Madelyn and Emma.
No spaces.
Yeah. Just like how I name my Civ towns when I'm playing with Aurora.
Spy Town.
Spy Town is not subtle.
It's reverse psychology, right?
Spy Town couldn't be spying on us.
Somebody in Madelyn and Emma online needs to found Spy Town, where it's a community of spies, but nobody thinks that they are, right?
Yeah. Well, folks, thanks for tuning in for our first excellent mashup of the recent past. I almost said of the recent future, but that's also probably true. It's probably our best mashup that we'll come up with for months.
What did we do last time? What were our games?
What even were our games? I don't remember.
I feel like it was decent last time, but I also can't remember what we talked about because we're terrible at our jobs.
I think I have my notes in the same to-do list. Let me see if it's here. No, I don't. Maybe it says...
We did Bayonetta and Vampire, but that was 2 times ago.
It was The Longest Journey in Delta Room. As my 627 to-do list says, research The Longest Journey, research Delta Room. They are bolded because I did it.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like that one was good. Whatever it was.
You're right. The mashups are only getting better, folks. So there's no better time to subscribe to Talk This. It's dangerous to podcast alone. Never miss a mashup by subscribing to us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, which I think a weird amount of you are maybe listening to us on TuneIn. I'm sorry, it's always like 5th in the list, TuneIn listeners. We care about you. Stitcher, Pandora Podcasts on the app. Don't know if I said Spotify yet, but also there. And pretty much any podcast app directory that you could possibly use, we're there. You can find a whole bunch of links to that on our website, talkthis.podcast.com. Almost said talkthis.com. That's not it. Talkthispodcast.com, where you can also find our blog, where you can read the long-running Clickbait Boyfriend and watch this split screen series, plus a bunch of X Thoughts and X Hours stuff that's been coming out over the past few weeks. Pretty prolific blog time. Great time to visit the website. And you can read more about Madelyn and Emma, not Madelyn and Emmaopolis, unfortunately. We don't have that section yet. But you can read more about us, more about the show, all that good stuff. We'd also love to encourage you to follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Talk This Podcast, and on YouTube at Talk This Sisters. Lots of good stuff on our social media always, including me griping about video game articles that I don't like, and Emma making Judgment Persona 5 mashups that no one knew they needed.
For real?
For real? For real, everyone. So you should follow us there. Share our episodes on your social media. Tell your friends. Leave us ratings and reviews. All that podcast stuff. You know the drill. So, ready to pick our next games?
I'm ready. So, for our old game, we are talking about SSX.
Yes!
Did we have just SSX, or did we have SSX Tricky?
We had SSX Tricky.
It's tricky.
Yeah.
There's some song that goes like that, I think. Okay. And our new game will be Gris. Gris. Gris? Gris.
What?
Gris.
Cool.
Gris.
I don't know how to pronounce it, but I sure will by this time 2 weeks from now.
I will sure try to learn how to pronounce it.
Oh, one more thing. Hey, listeners, thank you. Probably by the time that you're listening to this podcast, we will have crossed an important download milestone.
Heck yeah.
So thank you, everyone who's listened to us over the past couple of years. We really appreciate you. Couldn't do this without you. And just tune in next week for even more side quest goodness.
For real.
Emma, do you want to sign us out?
Oh boy. Yeah, sure. This week, I sure hope that you don't catch the space plane.